Last week in Michigan politics, Governor Whitmer unveiling her proposal on how the state should spend your tax dollars in next year's state budget, how much some of her most high-profile plans would cost. Plus, with advances in artificial intelligence technology coming so quickly, it's leaving many concerned about how deep fake videos and photos could impact this year's elections, what's being done to combat this kind of misinformation, and how you can spot them. And security is up in Dearborn after the release of a controversial Wall Street Journal opinion piece that the city's mayor says has led to an increase in online Islamophobia targeted at his city. What's being done and what the federal and state officials are saying. I'm Josh Alburtus, and this is your 13 on Your Side rundown. And we begin at the state capitol. Lawmakers soon will start to decide how the state will spend your tax dollars over the next year. Governor Gretchen Whitmer addressed lawmakers this week, unveiling her proposal for this year's state budget.
Your money front and center in Lansing Wednesday as Governor Gretchen Whitmer appeared before lawmakers to propose how the state should spend your taxpayer dollars as part of this year's state budget.
My proposal today will deliver on the vision that I outlined a couple weeks ago, lowering costs, improving education, and ensuring that anyone and everyone can make it here in Michigan.
Sitting at just under $81 billion total, the proposal is $1 billion less than the state's highest ever final budget passed last year, and unveiled just how much many of the governor's biggest plans from her State of the State address would cost. For her call for universal pre-K, that expansion under this budget would cost $159 million. Her call for free community college to qualifying high school graduates, those expansions would come with a price tag of $126 million for tuition assistance programs. And where she said she wants to continue free breakfast and lunch for public schools, that would be $200 million.
I know a lot of people watched the speech and rightfully asked, how the heck are we going to pay for this stuff while balancing the budget?
But in the end, these numbers are only a proposal. In order to pass a final budget, Whitmer would need majority support from both legislative houses. And even before that, it would need the go-ahead from the appropriations committees that make budget funding bills. One member of the Senate committee told us while there are areas he agrees with, he believes others will need work.
I'll always stand for working together, getting things done from our communities. Happy to work bipartisanly. At the end of the day, we have to recognize that these are hardworking taxpayer dollars. We have to make sure that we spend them prudently. And I frankly thought that there was a little bit of fluff in this budget, actually quite a bit.
And with budget talks that often take months to finish, it's possible many changes could be made. But as for a bare minimum the governor would accept for this year's budget if cuts were made, well, we asked her.
I will always negotiate with the legislature, regardless of whether it's Republican controlled or Democratic controlled. That's my job. I've started the process and we'll go from there. But I'm not going to say, here's this or that right now. They haven't even had an opportunity to read the whole budget yet. So there'll be plenty of time for those kind of conversations in the coming months.
The new fiscal year is set to start on October 1st.
And here are some other highlights from the governor's proposal this week to help reduce housing costs. She's asking for $1.4 billion for a housing and construction rehabilitation program. It would be run by the State Housing and Development Authority. She's also asking for a $5,000 tax credit for unpaid caregivers of aging or sick relatives. That would help cover the cost of counseling, transportation, and nursing services. And for the third year, Governor Whitmer is asking for a tax credit to boost auto sales, but this credit would include both electric and gas-powered vehicles. If approved, it would provide a $1,000 credit for new cars with a combustible engine, $2,000 for an EV or hybrid car, and $500 for buying a car built at a union shop. We have much more on the governor's proposed budget on our website, 13onyourside.com. And it seems like artificial intelligence is everywhere these days, some days in places you may not expect. So it's important to be able to identify artificial images, especially ahead of the elections. As 13 on your side's Julie Koharic explains, Michigan is at the forefront of AI legislation. She spoke to an expert on how to tell what's real and what's fake.
You've probably seen them, but you might not know. Images like this, viral online but non-existent in real life.
If we have something that you're sort of questioning that is this real, just sort of use your intuition.
Denton Bobbeldick specializes in artificial intelligence at GVSU.
Professor interviewed
He used 2 free AI services to create images of our interview.
by blonde hair reporter.
Images like this show the creativity and accessibility of AI.
Very easy as opposed to you, using your artistic talents.
Another service shows the rules and limitations. When he tried to make me a young reporter, he got this message, flagging it as potentially unsafe. But if he were to pay for the service, he could bypass this concern.
There's also some negative things that can happen. We saw what happened with Taylor Swift.
Pornographic, non-consensual AI photos of Swift went viral, bringing to light the lack of legislation around AI. So how can you tell what's real and what's fake?
AI still has a hard time with hands. It's not so much the hands, but it's the number of fingers.
Let's go back to this image. Besides the fact that it doesn't look like us, you can see the program had a really hard time with the hands, whether it's the placement or the amount of fingers or both. Going into the 2024 election season, knowing what to look for might be more important than ever.
Deepfakes are largely unregulated. Michigan is now, one of the leading states.
That's where Michigan's lawmakers enter the chat.
So that our voters don't have to question every single thing that they see online.
In April, the Republican National Committee released an ad to show how they see the future if President Biden is reelected.
For Joe Biden.
These images, realistic but entirely AI generated.
Taiwan.
It disclosed in small print at the top that it was made with AI. This law means this disclosure is now required at the state level.
We're asking that the disclosure not only say that it's AI generated, but also if the material is misleading.
More legislation may be on its way.
But it's a difficult issue because you're looking at the whole chain of events.
To keep the law in sync with the new tech.
So there's lots of different areas that could be legislated.
But it could be only one key.
It's a very difficult thing
to solve an emerging problem. For 13 on your side, I'm Julie Koharic.
And Michigan is now one of only 5 states that has deepfake legislation for political ads. The representative we spoke to says the next step is regulating explicit AI images. As of just late this week, the Federal Communications Commission has now outlawed AI-generated voices in robocalls under the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. With that move, AI-generated voice calls would also fall under the purview of that act, making them illegal. By taking this step, the Associated Press reports that FEC will now be able to fine those that still use AI in these kinds of calls, or even block service providers that carry them. Now to your voice, your vote. As Michigan's presidential primary gets closer, the state is following a significant increase in absentee ballot requests. The Secretary of State's office reported this week that nearly 1.3 million Michigan voters have requested an absentee ballot for the primary. That's nearly double the amount of requests from this same point in the 2020 election. People can register to vote by mail or online through February 12th or at their local clerk's office through 8 p.m. on Election Day. In-person early voting starts on February 17th. Election Day is now just in 3 weeks on February 27th. And U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was in Kent County Wednesday, stumping for President Joe Biden. He spoke with phone bank workers at the Democratic Party office on Fuller before heading to that Early Bird Cafe to speak with members of the community. He urged them to vote for Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Buttigieg then traveled to Lansing, where he spoke with union workers at UA Local 333, plumbers and pipe fitters, about the Biden administration's accomplishments on manufacturing and labor. He was joined there by Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist. Federal, state, and local leaders are responding after a controversial op-ed was published in the Wall Street Journal centering around the city of Dearborn. The article calls the city America's jihad capital, claiming many there support terrorism and the Hamas attack on Israel. Dearborn's mayor says since the release of that article, there's been an increase in Islamophobic rhetoric online targeting his city. And that increased security will now be placed at its places of worship. Whitney Burney from our Detroit affiliate has reaction from city and federal leaders.
Dearborn Mayor Abdullah Hammoud says a controversial article in the Wall Street Journal is putting city residents at risk. The article, titled "Welcome to Dearborn, America's Jihad Capital," was published on Friday. Its author, quoting a Michigan State Police assessment submitted to the Justice Department after 9/11, claims the city of Dearborn is a recruiting area and potential support base for international terror groups. The article also pointed out rallies following the October 7th attack on Israel and alleged quotes from area faith leaders as support for Hamas. The mayor of the city of Dearborn took to social media calling the article inflammatory and says its release has directly resulted in a, quote, alarming increase in bigoted and Islamophobic rhetoric online targeting the city. Residents can now expect to see more police at places of worship and major points of infrastructure. President Joe Biden also responding, posting the following on X, formerly known as Twitter. Biden says, quote, Americans know that blaming a group of people based on the words of a small few is wrong. That's exactly what can lead to Islamophobia and anti-Arab hate, and it shouldn't happen to the residents of Dearborn or any American town.
And that was Whitney Burney reporting. And at a stop in Grand Rapids this week to push for universal pre-K, Governor Gretchen Whitmer also responded to that article, saying it's a misrepresentation of an important city and calling it, quote, abhorrent.
I recognize that there are a lot of people hurting because of the war that is raging in Israel and Gaza. People with Jewish relatives who are hurting, people with Palestinian or Muslim relatives that are hurting. And that's why my job as governor has been to try to keep the heat down here at home, make sure people are safe, whether they worship in a mosque, a synagogue, or a church, or anywhere else for that matter.
And on social media, Governor Whitmer added that Islamophobia and all forms of hate have no place in Michigan.
Because Americans are ticked off that this is not resolved, and they expect us to get things done.
And just days before the U.S. Senate failed this week to move forward a bipartisan deal designed to address what some called an immigration and national security crisis at the southern border, local Congresswoman Hillary Scholten traveled with other members to that border. Her office says that during the visit, she and others visited a border crossing in Texas and holding facility in El Paso, speaking with Border Patrol officials about the agency's capabilities and needs. They also visited an organization providing hospitality services to migrants and refugees at the border. While the Senate's bipartisan deal has since failed to make it out of the chamber for now, Scholten asserted, quote, the only path forward is bipartisan. We must act now. And in Ottawa County, a local publication has gotten involved in the legal proceedings surrounding the county's embattled health officer, Adeline Hambly. The Holland Sentinel filed a motion in court this week to make public testimony that happened behind closed doors last month when a judge ruled the county did not have to go through with a $4 million settlement payment to Hambly. According to the filing, the Sentinel is seeking access to the closed proceedings and records from the court's January 19th hearing. That's where they heard testimony from the county clerk on whether to enforce what Hambly believed to be a settlement, $4 million in exchange for her resignation after months of the county exploring options to remove her for alleged incompetence. The filing argues, quote, the Sentinel has a right of access to court proceedings and court rules under the First Amendment, the common law, and the court rules.
We disagree with the rulings. We think the public has a right to know. We think the defendants really need to subject themselves to public testimony here, and by continuing to oppose it, I don't think that instills public trust. But you know, we are where we are, and I understand the judge's decision, even if I disagree with it.
As I've said repeatedly, it's not because we don't want information out there or we don't want somebody to be heard. We do. But there are laws that we're bound by, and the board is bound by. and we can't make those kinds of disclosures. We just can't, not without proper, court decisions and things like that. And so we're very pleased with the judge's ruling, and this $4 million thing is gone now, as it should have been way back when.
The Sentinel's motion is expected to be heard in court next week. Lawmakers this week heard from local filmmakers and other groups about possibly bringing back tax incentives so that the next blockbuster films could be made right here in Michigan.
After months of waiting for many, signs of movement in Lansing on a pair of bills many filmmakers say would bring the major films of tomorrow to Michigan. A House committee heard testimony Tuesday about the potential of bringing film tax credits to the state to encourage film producers to come here.
The Multimedia Jobs Act really incentivizes producers from all over the country to spend money in Michigan. This is money that would have been spent elsewhere, and we're saying let's set up our state to welcome these producers, bring them here, and put all of our people to work.
Among those who testified, both current and aspiring filmmakers from right here in West Michigan.
I desperately wish to stay in my home state and build my life here. But that dream is not presently feasible with the current state of the film industry in Michigan. The film industry is highly competitive, and with the passing of House Bills 4907 and 4908, I and many other young creatives would have the opportunity to not only forge our paths as filmmakers, but to also start our own families and keep up with the growing industry at large.
While Michigan did have incentives in the past, those expired in 2015. These credits would be somewhat different, with what proponents say are safeguards to make sure the benefits stay here in Michigan.
The last time Michigan wrote checks that went out of state. This time that is not going to happen. When it's done, the production company or the entity that owns the production that got filmed gets a tax credit that's good for a Michigan tax liability.
But some in the room Tuesday were not convinced the credits would be worth the expense.
The $500 million that we spent on film production could have been spent on schools or roads or poverty alleviation programs that also have the secondary and tertiary benefits that our film industries have pointed at as the primary benefits of this programs.
I don't know if we're getting the data that we need to make the decision as an economic development piece of legislation.
While the package already has bipartisan support, it will have a long road ahead if it is to make it into law.
And another date will have to be scheduled for that committee to vote on whether to send those bills for a vote. It would then have to go through the same process over in the Senate, and both chambers would need to agree on a final version if it hopes to make it to the governor's desk. And that is the rundown for your week in Michigan politics. Be sure to keep up with all the top political stories of the day, both on air and online at 13onyourside.com. We'll see you next week.